Hey, and welcome to the Publish Press podcast. I'm Steve Burge from Publish Press, and we make publishing plugins for WordPress.
I'm Dan Knaus. I'm a solution architect with Multidot, an enterprise WordPress agency that works with all kinds of publishers and other clients who are running WordPress to publish content and get business done.
So we talk about publishing with WordPress on this podcast, and we have a really interesting guest today who focuses on government. Now, he's been a journalist, he's been in technology, and he tries to combine a lot of the skills he's taken from those careers and applies it to government websites, in particular, making them more useful, making them more efficient, making them more helpful for citizens. Dan, when we were brainstorming potential guests, and you were the one who suggested Luke as a guest. What is it about Luke that really interests you?
Yeah, I've been aware of Luke for a long time because many roles and another lifetime, another place, I was very involved with this similar things. I think I used some of Luke's work for building websites for political elected officials in my city for political campaigns, and was very interested in data journalism, citizen journalism, advocacy, open data, municipal data that was coming out. Luke has kind of been a part of that for a much longer period. And it was really interesting to check back in and see what's going on nowadays. Things have changed. Got AI in play now, all the way from us older folks, kind of pre-internet RSS days, all the way up to now using AI with the same purpose, though, of civic technology, opening government, making more accessible to people who serve and work in those roles and the public.
Awesome. Yeah, this conversation goes all the way from like feed burner and almost the very early days of the internet, all the way up to AI. But Luke's philosophy of being useful and trying to make government better for citizens has been the through line throughout all that work. So welcome, guys. Let's hear from Luke. Hey, Luke, welcome to the Publish Press podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Welcome.
So, Luke, I always do some research before someone comes on. I don't want to be one of those podcast hosts that realizes someone is on the podcast and suddenly tries to figure out some questions to ask. So, for those of you who are watching on YouTube, I've got all my research here, and I've never had as much research on someone as for you. Like, the number of things you've done, you've been involved with is long, like dozens of projects. But you were an original WordPress developer back in the day, right?
Yeah, I mean, early WordPress theming, official theme,
Like you developed a theme that was specifically for local governments to use WordPress, right? GovFresh?
Yep, we called it GovFresh. It was kind of, I think it was like GovWP or something. I can't remember, but there were sort of the rules around how you could name a theme. So we ended up going with GovPress. And just really wanted to build a theme that was simple and responsive at the time. I don't know if we were using the word responsive, but really sort of the fluid design and 100%, and, using percentage-based fonts and widths, and really something that government could easily use to plug in on the front end that was really simple and not sort of, overly complex with carousels and motion and things like that.
Yeah, I think I used it on a couple of Milwaukee County and city political sites, elected officials and campaigns. So yeah, I didn't really remember.
That's great to hear.
Later connected with you and didn't make that connection until later.
Yeah, well, it's funny at its heyday. We've obviously we've kind of moved away. We have moved away from it, and we've archived it on the GitHub. But at its heyday, there were thousands. I'm sure there were not just government, but there were thousands of active installations of it, which was. It's always fun when you're building something and then, especially open source, and there's a a good adoption. So it was fun to see that adoption and really kind of open me up to the power of, open communities, open source, and how you can scale, your impact through technology.
So which of those interests came first for you? Were you into WordPress, into technology, into software, or into the government side of things? Into making government better, into focusing on civic action?
Yeah, I feel like my origin story starts in college as the managing editor and then the editor-in-chief of the college newspaper. I went to a school called George Mason University outside of DC and studied government and politics and international relations. But I wasn't like the greatest college student, and it just didn't gel with kind of how I learn, how I, intellectually or, get excited. But I knew that I had to get a college degree, right? So stuck it out. But we didn't have a journalism department, and so anybody could kind of show up and, get assigned something. It was very meritocracy based. If you came and wrote an article, it got into the newspaper. If you did whatever. So I became the managing editor and then the editor, and I was able to kind of blend sort of writing, journalism with, design. I was really interested in the designing of the paper, and photography. We had the dark room back in the day. I'd go into the dark room with them, and then there's just the print, like we would be up late and I would always drive to the printer with the paper, and they would give it to the printer, and then go home and go to bed and wake up, and you'd see students reading the newspaper. So really sort of this idea of publishing and product, the newspaper as a product, and publishing, that my origin story around kind of where, I evolved with sort of WordPress and blogging and even kind of civics started with working at the college newspaper. And then
did the George Mason newspaper have a online edition?
Not at that time. We didn't. There was no, this was, I'm old enough to be pre-internet in college. I think we had like email addresses, or they gave them to us. And I don't know if anybody really used them because it wasn't really a thing. But yeah, it was, really back in the 90s.
I was Xeroxing zines. When we wanted to make a publication, but yeah, I worked on a print magazine in school and some all print. Yeah. Going to driving, taking word processor, early desktop publishing, take the disk to the printer and or for our illegal underground publications, going to North Carolina State and using their big Xerox machines. And, but then as soon as I graduated 1995, then it was like a switch flipped and learned all this new web stuff.
Yeah, it's about the same time, right? Like, it just really like the internet started happening, and then I started teaching myself to code because I realized, wow, you can publish something to the internet, and you can do it immediately, and it's free, and you just bypass so much. So I started teaching myself to code. And I grew up, outside of DC, and decided that I needed to be where technology was, because I wasn't smart enough or, good enough to be a journalist, and a real journalist. And just decided
You have quite a publishing record for someone that claims they're not meant to be a journalist.
Well, when you're a blogger, right, you can get away with not being a real journalist. I think, but yeah, I really like to write, and I definitely moving to the Bay Area, I really got more entrenched into sort of technology, which I never would have imagined that I would be doing technology when I was in college. And then, that's how I kind of found WordPress. But yeah, and that's what kind of really empowered me to see, as you mentioned, just really kind of pick up from the journalism aspect. And it allowed me to kind of be more prolific because, WordPress was at that time was such an easy tool for me to just build and publish.
How did you make that move from personal publishing to helping municipalities, kind of civic publishing, government systems?
Yeah, I mean, I think with WordPress, right? Like a friend of mine set it up for me and showed me how to do the theming. And I had been, in the Bay Area doing kind of user research, user experience work, and doing a lot of front end design. And just because I was very much into kind of Jacob Nielsen and the whole movement around, making websites simple and having an appreciation for words on web pages, both in kind of navigation elements, button elements, but also kind of copy.
This would be in the era of Steve Krug.
And, Steve Krug, Don't Make Me Think. Right? Yeah, you're bringing back all the memories. And so I just started theming, and then I themed, when I started, I created GovFresh, which maybe we can talk about, but I started blogging about the intersection of technology and government at a certain point, and realized, I was asking for help on the theming, and finally I was shown, here's how you can change the theme that you have. And as soon as I learned how to change the theme, the light bulbs went off, and I really started thinking, wow, you've got WordPress, which is a simple content management system that anybody can use to publish to the internet. And then you have this theme over here that you can create a visual layer for, and it can be whatever you want. And then I started thinking about, well, how awesome would it be if government had a simple web theme that they could use for free and use this free content management system? And then you'd have to figure out kind of the hosting for it. But two big components of kind of price or cost for a website goes down significantly. And that's when I started working with Devin Price and building GovPress for, a WordPress theme for government.
So you started as a journalist and moved out to the Silicon Valley, San Francisco, Oakland area,
Berkeley, and San Francisco. I'm in the Bay Area, yeah. So
you had the journalism, blogging background, and then you added on the technology skills. How did the government piece of it come together for you?
Yeah, I mean, at that time, right, like Obama became president, and the first thing he did when he came into office was he created the Open Government Directive, which essentially opened up the doors to a culture of open, right? And folks who are in open source, kind of get it, but it's really the transparency, collaboration, transparency, and engagement, right? Were kind of the foundations. And, everybody in open source knows those things. They're inherent into the psyche of anybody who is an open source zealot. And with the open source or the Open Government Directive, open data, open source became, very much key topics and emphasis for the Obama administration. And I just thought, wow, this is a really cool opportunity to sort of go back to my quote roots in having grown up near DC and studied government and politics, but also, moving to the Bay Area and understanding technology, even to some degree, a little bit more granular by working on this theme, or building, kind of my theme for GovFresh, which eventually helped me connect the dots on GovPress and thinking, here's open source, here's this move towards open source, a theme for government would be really great.
Can you tell us more about GovFresh? What was it? How did it combine the skills you'd been building up?
Yeah. So, the origin story of GovFresh is, I can't remember what I'm a huge RSS fan, and I don't know, Google had a service. It wasn't Feedly. Maybe it was a FeedReader.
Google Reader?
Google Reader. I can't remember what. I feel like it was feed something. I can't remember, but it was an RSS feed. And what we did was I created pages in WordPress.
Oh, yeah. They had Google Reader, which would input, and then they purchased FeedBurner, was it?
FeedBurner, that's what it was.
Yeah, we all used that because you could do a newsletter off of it. You could modify it. You could transform the RSS output. There was Yahoo Pipes. You could do quite a lot.
So what I did was I had a WordPress site, GovFresh.com. So the idea was, so I think with FeedBurner, what I did was I started setting pages for like the White House, and I would pull in like the YouTube feed, the RSS feed, the Twitter feed, and I would be able to just like look and see like, here's what is coming directly from the White House. And I did it for like the CIA, the NSA, all of the federal agencies. And then I started thinking, it'd be cool to like, Dan, as you say, pipe it into a website. So, and syndicate it, kind of like, an API, and have my own interface. So I did that, and I was using that as like sort of a branded feed reader. And was thinking of a name, and I thought, well, every time I refresh the page, there's a new update. So I just looked up GovFresh as a URL, and it was available, and I bought it. And then as I started seeing how bad, going to the websites through the links, seeing how bad government websites were, I just thought, man, this is like, there's a total disconnect between the technology and the products that are being built in the Bay Area, and what's happening in DC. And so then I just converted GovFresh into a blog and started writing about what I thought.
So you started to get really interested in all of these bad websites that have been coming through your RSS feeds, all these websites that were hard to navigate, maybe over-designed.
Yeah.
Not very citizen friendly.
Well, especially in smaller municipalities, even fairly big ones, up to a metro of 1 million people. Definitely where I was in the Midwest. Yeah, they either overspend on really bad proprietary systems, and don't know what to ask for, and are terrible clients. Or there was kind of that era of, it was all very new too. So is that what led you then into kind of the consulting, or would you say that's what you did with Proud City?
Yeah. I mean, I think we built GovPress, and really saw the growth of that. And then, I think like I met up with Kevin, Jeff, and Alex, who were the co-founders of Proud City. And they had been they were very much in the Drupal community, and they were a Drupal services firm. And we met at actually a DrupalCon, and we all just kind of started talking about sort of, as I mentioned, right, there was this content management, this open source content management systems that were out there, Drupal, WordPress, you mentioned Joomla. And then there's the front end problem, right? There's a simple design that doesn't suck, right? Was websites that suck? That used to be like a blog that would feature, but it was just really like a simple, elegant website theme. But the problem was that there wasn't the hosting component. So government couldn't, quote, just sort of, flip a switch and get going. And then the four of us just started talking about, well, how do we create a SaaS, software as a service that brought all those three things together and made it really easy for government, really easy and cost effective for them to, leverage these open source technologies with a layer of kind of, delivering a government service or public service that addressed everyone's needs, now like accessibility, security, and really do it in a way that's cost effective and scales. So we launched Proud City, which was powered, and we can talk about it if you'd like, but we leveraged the WordPress platform to build it.
Also, it was a custom WordPress base that was used to used to host all these government sites.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
So,
And go ahead.
Sorry. I'm just curious though, when you talk about scale, like there's so many different sizes in the budget, the amount of the number of constituents, the configuration of municipal bodies. Was it a one size fits all or something you could actually scale to different? I think I recall you had a pricing based on population.
Mm-hmm.
And is that still the case?
Yeah, so there's a pricing. It's population based. There was a minimum, but we really wanted to, kind of scale it, and we wanted the goal was to make pricing transparent. There's several reasons why government has bad websites. But one of them is just sort of the procurement process, and we wanted to just kind of make pricing transparent, so that it was easy for them to kind of understand and even buy, and that's why we did it, at a per resident price, because it was easy for us to create a pricing. You have 100,000 people, it's this much money, and as far as scale within the communities, there were cities that were hundreds of people, 500 person city. And I think the largest, to date is 300 something thousand, Santa Ana in California. There may be a county that is bigger, but it goes from 300,000 to, less than 1,000 population cities.
That's really interesting. I've never heard of a pricing model quite like that before. Basing the pricing on the number of people who live near where the website is serving.
Yeah, it just solved a lot of problems for us in thinking about, the tiers, and there's obviously some upgrades that happen that have pricing on it, but we just wanted to keep it as simple as possible. And it's great when you have population as a way to determine price, and it's just really easy. You pull the census data and put a number on it and multiply it, and that's the price. And like I said, we had a minimum, but you couldn't buy one for 5 cents a month, but it solved a lot of the problems around pricing things out, and I think it eliminated confusion for government folks as well.
So how did you get clients then? Did you have the network already, and it just spread from there, or how did that take hold?
Yeah, I think part of it was, network and knowing folks, and we did some pilots, and we would, we were successful with those. And then, after a while, right, government isn't competing with one another to the large degree, right? They want to help each other. That community wants to help each other. Cities are certainly, competing for each other for certain things. But generally, right, the staffs, want to support each other. So, a lot of our customers and that we acquired were word of mouth and just reference, and just being honest about the pricing and showing transparency. And being honest that we weren't, Dan, as you mentioned, we weren't proprietary. If you wanted the data and the code, if we weren't doing our job and you wanted to take everything, the code, the data, you could do that. And I think, the combination of word of mouth and customers, sharing it with their communities, and the sort of ethos of open generally really address some of the fears that governments have with website vendors back then and even today.
How many?
Yeah, we've had a...
Oh, sorry, Steve. How many municipalities did you bring onto the Proud City platform?
Yeah, there's a little over 100, and those range from large city, mostly mid-sized cities and smaller cities. I would say, 50,000 and below. And then some counties and some county agencies.
We've had more than one person who's come on the podcast, and they've had technically you would call them SaaS platforms, but it's more like hosted WordPress. One of the big selling points for them too, they've been selling to newspapers or magazines or to different audiences. But one of the big selling points was exactly that because we're built in WordPress, there's no vendor lock-in. If you don't like us, you could take your site off the platform and go and host it somewhere else.
Yeah. Yep. And the other aspects of, why we made the business decision to choose WordPress. And, the other three guys were Drupal developers. They had been doing this for, a minimum 5 years. So they were pretty entrenched into the Drupal ecosystem. And, so one of the challenges, so there's a procurement challenge in government, or procurement causes problems for a technology adoption, modern technology adoption, but also sort of training. There's just not the skill set, and we felt like if I was going to train, my mom, who is not computer savvy, what would I want to train them on to onboard them to a content management system? Is it Joomla? Is it Drupal? Is it WordPress? And the answer was yes to WordPress. So this is such an intuitive thing. And we found a lot of people are like, oh, I use WordPress for my, XYZ, website or blog at home or whatever. So, that was the simplicity of the onboarding, the training part was really important for bringing, in the sales process.
So you spent years selling into government of all sizes. Is it a tough market to be in? Is it tough to make sales? Is it tough to navigate the procurement process? Or counterintuitively, is it actually quite a good and interesting market to be in?
Well, it's good and interesting in that, if you care about kind of serving, government, and if you generally care about civics and you're a technologist, it's good because when you do get a government customer and you have sort of open ethos, it's exciting because you're truly empowering that municipality to leverage resources in other ways that they now have because they're using open source, and knowing that the technical debt and the data, rights are being protected. So, you can wake up in the morning and feel good that you're actually doing good. The procurement part and the sales part of government, it just varies. Every, municipality, there's just such a different approach. Some people have RFPs where they're like, we need resumes for Dan, Luke, and Steve, and we need to know like what they're going to do, what their projects are. And there's just these kind of old school specifications that are just sort of, copied from, a Google search and, repasted from the 90s. And so, people just don't know like what they don't know. So they just kind of take whatever's out there. So you get these rigid RFPs that don't apply today for service models, but they especially don't apply for software, right? Like if you were going to get Google Work and you put out an RFP, you wouldn't say, well, I need Sergey's resume, right? Like it just doesn't work that way. And we were more software focused. So, those elements made it kind of a challenge, but it ranged, some of it was, you do an RFP and you go through sort of an interview process, which we tried to stay away from, to one guy called us on the phone driving home from City Hall saying he was on the website and or on our website and got the pricing before he left and called us and said, can you take my credit card? Right? Like it just ranged. The range was, So it's just kind of, but generally, right? Like procurement selling to government is a challenge because, when we talk about things like vendor lock-in or data rights or open source and saving money, a lot of that is lost on them. So, that's a challenge, is sort of the educating folks on, why this stuff is important. but also the reality, right? Like, especially now, if you look at the government website vendors, the top tier vendors that have, and when I say top tier, I mean by customer, not by necessarily by actually being a good product. They're all owned by private equity, and there's an incentive there. There's a they're all proprietary. And there's a model there to keep those governments on their quote platforms by any means necessary. So it's a challenge. It's a real challenge.
But it can't be too bad because you're still in the same sector now, right? You moved on from Proud City.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you're still launching products aimed at government, aimed at making their website better, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's the sort of innovator's dilemma, right? You want to, keep building something new, and then there's challenges around that, right? Like creating new products and new startups and new ideas, right? You just never know, are they going to work? So, you really have to have support of other folks, and also just sort of be comfortable with uncertainty. But yeah, now I'm working with, two ideas. One is ScanGov, and the other one is ChatCivic, which is, ScanGov sort of scans a website and gives feedback on where it stands from accessibility, content, security, performance. Is it AI friendly, and some other kind of what we call indicators. And then ChatCivic is really sort of thinking about how can government provide an AI chatbot to its community that makes it easier to find the information behind the bad websites and municipal code, and any of those resources in a way that kind of meets the moment of, where we are with Claude and ChatGPT and things like that. But both very early stage, experiments.
So, Luke, can you take us through ScanGov?
Mm-hmm.
Basically, you're looking to rank government websites according to certain criteria, whether they're accessible. Well, you take me through it. What's the purpose of ScanGov?
Yeah, so ScanGov, the idea was, my oldest son, Elias, who's now 17, I think he was 14 when the pandemic was, and he's always been inclined towards computers and kind of coding, and he was bored. So I started, I explained to him what APIs were, and he started pulling data, creating, an interface, and we built a COVID dashboard that kind of showed. He pulled API data from Census and CDC and was showing, here's the population of the state and here's the percentage of people that have been vaccinated. And we would run that daily. And there was some other kind of cards that showed different metrics. So we've kind of always since then, we've sort of hacked away together at different things. And then at some point we, started talking about, and I can't remember how I got on this. I think I was just annoyed that USA Jobs didn't have an open graph image that showed up on job postings in LinkedIn. It was just text. And I just thought, wow, it'd be great if USA Jobs had an open graph image. So when it posted on LinkedIn, you could see USA Jobs, and it would brand it. It would give more visibility to the job posting, and increase the click rate, right? The interest in it. And a simple thing like that, right, could impact, applications or interest. So then I started talking with Elias about, wouldn't it be cool to scan the metadata, from the header, the HTML header in government websites, and just sort of grade them based on whether they have certain things. So we started with robots and sitemap and open graph, and really just sort of grading on those things. And it was really shocking because, you'd think wow, this is it was page title and some of the basics even that they didn't have, that are outside of open graph, just old school kind of metadata. And we started grading them, and it was just kind of fascinating to see. And then we started adding a ranking and a map to it for the states and the cities, and we'll be doing counties soon. But it caught people's attention because it was really like, wow, this is interesting. It's a public sort of dashboard of where folks stand. And I think I think civic hacking, the important thing of civic hacking is to sort of rage against the machine, but do it in a way that is civil and constructive and help educate. So we built an educational component in, like, you don't have XYZ. This is what it is. This is why it's important. And
it's a form of data journalism. That's what it came to be called when journalists do it.
Yeah. And so, when we published it and some of the industry press, the GovTech industry press covered it, we actually got calls from people or I got DMs on LinkedIn from chief digital officers and federal agencies thanking us because it helped them know what they didn't know. And they were chief digital officers, right? I just ran the scan on my personal website and GovFresh, and it picked up things I didn't know. And I've been doing internet for, 30 years. And so really, I think the way that we released it, it wasn't just a name and shame. There was an educational component so people could kind of understand. So the tone wasn't as toxic. It was much more, productive and constructive. And then, so it's just sort of helped people. We opened up, the GitHub repo. So it's all open source, but we also let people do an issue request to update their data when they made changes. And, folks started doing it. It's less so now, but, when we first published it, there were states and federal agencies that made changes based on that and would submit an issue. You can look in the repo under the data update filter and see there were some, pretty significant state governments and federal agencies that made changes based on that work. It felt like a great civic hacking project. And then it got us started thinking deeper about, well, is there a commercial aspect to this? And I've been working with Aaron Hans, who I worked with on a California Alpha project, which basically it was the precursor to what's now the California Office of Data and Innovation. But the Alpha project was kind of a test to show the state how a digital service team could work in the open and agile and user-centered. And so Aaron and I met and we just kind of started talking like, hey, this service, right? You've got like all of these different scanning programs out there, accessibility, security. But, we just thought, wouldn't it be nice to have something that was very simple and intuitive that, played off of what ScanGov, what we call now call Project ScanGov, is doing with kind of report cards and educating folks on how to remediate those things. And that's what we're working on.
This is such a fascinating project. I got like 3 probably questions / observations after. I know it sounds like Dan's got a couple too.
Me too. I'm just curious for what the 30-year view on this. I was very invested in a very specific kind of municipality and data journalism and on a lot of levels and civic hacking and just hacking. And there seemed to be a moment for that. And it was like a decade, 10, 15 years ago. Was there a waning, and if so, why? And does it have its moment again? Is something coming back? You said you're a big fan of RSS. I'm helping organize WordCamp Canada later this year. I'd love to have you up. Dave Weiner just announced as our keynote. So
nice.
Wrote the RSS spec and right with you there on the importance of open APIs and civic hacking. But that's from another era, or is it? Is there where do you see things now and where they could go?
Yeah, I mean, I think so I date like the beginning of civic tech, and this is in my context, is like, during the early Obama years, maybe a little before that, folks started hacking, and there was sort of the Web 2.0 movement, and then Tim O'Reilly did the Gov 2.0 movement. So kind of Open Gov, Web 2.0 really ushered in this sort of, and also like open source really just kind of coming to its own. And I think like GitHub, these sort of public Git tools where people could see things in a non-nerdy way really ushered in this moment of kind of civic meets technology. And, we were riding the wave. Obama did the directive, and everything was moving. And then, to your question, Dan, I think that like when healthcare.gov happened, it sort of put a stop to that because the emphasis became digital service and agile and product delivery. And then what you saw was a lot of recruitment from, big tech, into this that weren't versed in open culture. They were versed in building products. So then you saw this kind of shift from the open culture to product and product delivery and digital service. And it didn't, there was some of like, we're, kind of open or whatever. There wasn't like an emphasis on that. And then I think, because of the pressure of healthcare.gov, and then everybody else was like, well, we don't want to be that, we don't want to be the next healthcare.gov. It was a move towards product ownership, product delivery, agile, and the open component started to go away. And I think like moving forward, right? I mean, politically, technology, like anybody who's going to predict what's going to happen tomorrow, good luck. But I think that, we're starting to see kind of blue sky and some of this Web3, to some degree. Well, I think, open source is really starting to grow. I mean, we're talking about open source AI. Everybody has a different definition of that, but we're starting to see open source become part of the vernacular in a way that it hasn't been before, right? And it's becoming more acceptable. I mean, what people mean by it is like a whole nother conversation, but there's a level of open source that is being accepted, and not, oh, it's open source. Oh, you're using Drupal or WordPress. Oh, you're not secure, right? Like, how many times have y'all heard that? And we're not hearing that as much, right? It's a concern, just like proprietary. But I think with, kind of what we're seeing with Blue Sky and the adoption of that, and Mastodon to some degree, with these Web3 principles that are coming aboard, it's trending. It's not, I wouldn't say it's, happening immediately, but it's all starting to trend in a good way.
So you have ScanGov, which is on GitHub, which you take pull requests for. It's constructive. It's open source.
Yeah.
It's making the web better. And the other project you're working on is AI for government as well. Is that right? Building chatbots for local governments. Can you tell us more about that? They seem just on the surface to be a little less open source, hackable, and so on.
Yeah, I mean, it's very nascent. And so I'm working with Jake Rosran, who is kind of a data, really smart data scientist. And we just started chatting about kind of LLMs and, how you could tap into what's called RAG, right? Like these sources that are specified to, government websites and municipal code, and how, government websites are bad, right? But if you can get on a chatbot and you're familiar with it, and the chatbot actually returns a good result, you could solve your bad government website experience really easily. So because he's really a smart guy and knows how to put all of the technical components together, we just started playing around with, what does it look like? What does it look like if you RAG the website and the municipal code, and then start fine tuning what does the government experience look like? The digital government experience look like? So we've just been kind of MVPing, what that would look like. And we started to put a brand on it and have built it out a little bit more. So it's still very nascent, but seeing the results that, as I was giving Jake feedback on the answers and building out sort of principles and how do we make it where has a civic focus, and there are principles and it's transparent in some ways, incorporating that stuff in and seeing the responses and like now starting to tweak what's helpful to somebody on our response. It's kind of blowing my mind and forcing me in a really good way to rethink sort of being precious about search engines and the web as we know it today, and really thinking about the government experience and using chat as a way to help people find the information and act on it so that they can move on and not have to deal with bad websites or just the bureaucracy. And I still think the web is important, right? We need sources of truth. We need links. We need URLs to provide sources of truth. We need structured data. We need good content. But it has helped me rethink what I think is going to be a big component of the experience that people have with their governments.
So the name of this is ChatCivic.ai, right?
Yeah.
And the idea is people can come there, they can type in, when is my trash delivery, or what are the building codes in my area, and hopefully get a useful response.
Yeah. So we're going to be, we're going to start reaching out to municipalities to kind of help them set this up so that they can, we will brag their, and I don't know I always forget what RAG stands for. Can anybody help me out?
I was actually reminding myself of that yesterday. And it's one of those, I don't remember.
But the idea, right, is to...
like DocSpot, retrieval augmented generation.
Yeah, so that's a nerd term for, with ChatGPT or Claude, right, you search and it searches the internet. And with something like ChatCivic, it says, we're not going to search the internet. We're going to search just official sources that you provide this tool. So, the idea is to let cities stand up their own chat that pulls those sources, but, quote, thinks intelligently and returns an answer that is really helpful. And then government, at least initially the idea is the government can provide a code snippet on their website. So there's a little button that says something like, chat with us or get help that links to their particular, chat GPT like service.
If you don't mind me asking, how are you approaching this from an open way? Are you able to use one of the off-the-shelf AI services that everyone knows about, or do you have some kind of open source alternative?
Yeah, I mean, this is so. We're starting out with. The MVP on this, right? The best way to do that is using one of the current tools. So we're integrating in with OpenAI and the tools that they have. And what we're starting to think about is how do we be open? What do we do? Like, where do we start with this? And we wanted to get the MVP out, so that was the easiest way to do it. So now we've started to work on some principles. Here are AI principles. And then think about, what are the prompts that we're using to test this, and publishing those, and then starting to show, here are the responses that we are getting on our tests. And then so folks can see, okay, they've got principles and they're testing this, and here are the prompts. So, okay, they're using some really good prompts to test this, and here are the results. I think as we evolve, we'll think about like, what is the open source technology part of that looks, but we're so early with it and we're pulling from OpenAI that, it's still kind of early on that, but my hope is that, we continue to start being more open on that front as well.
How do you deal with potential political sensitivities of that? I can imagine things like, you rag the municipal code or something, and is that really what it says about capacity for big landlords? Or and when you find out even true things, there's hallucination possibilities. But what we always did that would cause trouble productively was actually sift through data, with that way pre-AI tools, or actually watch zoning meetings, licensing meetings, or budget review committees that, we're running out of local daily papers, kind of declining. No one's covering this stuff. You just pick out the right data, pull out the right numbers, the right quotes, and then boom, that goes to the big journalists or bloggers, and you suddenly have moved the needle on, an expose is kind of the easiest way to do that. But there's always sensitivity, and that's what I found too, that tends to make them want to lock up a bit and be very concerned about what's coming out. Have you had to navigate that kind of thing, or do you anticipate that?
I mean, I think that there's, it's still really early. I mean, we're still very much MVP on kind of testing this idea. I mean, like I said, I'm really surprised and in a good way, the responses that we see when we're testing, when we're doing the test prompts. I think for government, right? Like it needs to start thinking about how can it be relevant. They're already government, and where technology is going is already kind of like going like this, and with AI, it's going to start to go like this, and almost, potentially could make people be more distrustful or, ambivalent to democracy and government. So government needs to really start getting on top of this and understanding it, and even adopting it to some degree, because the expectations that, people can find information and act on it are going to only get higher. I mean, I have 2 kids. One of them is still old school with the way that he uses, because he's kind of principled on, searching and doing it kind of the old way. The other one is everything is ChatGPT, everything. And I think that people are going to need to be, they're going to need to think about this less politically and more, how can it serve? And if you're building tools that have fine tuning and address some of the toxic stuff that people are going to try to prompt it, you're going to be, it'll be okay. It's not going to be perfect.
Is there going to be a need not just for the governments to be presenting the information accurately on their own websites, but also serving it up accurately? Because you talk about your kid. I've got a kid, or 2 kids in the same situation. One of them rarely uses AI. One of them uses it all the time. Guaranteed, people like our kids who are addicted to AI will be going to ChatGPT and asking, when's my trash delivery? What are the building codes in my neighborhood? So is it a case that you're going to be trying to provide interesting information from your chatbot, ChatCivic, but is there also perhaps an opportunity to try and accurately provide the data to all the big services to make sure they're not hallucinating the local trash delivery or hallucinating the building codes?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think it's just, I think that's what's important about a service like ChatCivic, is really thinking about how can we make sure this is being presented truthfully. And as you're able to kind of refine sort of this, the experience, with like municipal code or, whatever, meeting minutes, meeting agendas, and you're able to kind of refine those, it's much easier to sort of layer that into another municipality because they have kind of similar operations. Whereas, with kind of a ChatCivic or with a ChatGPT or Claude, it may be harder because, they're not, fine tuning as well for those cases.
Cool. So, thanks so much for your time, Luke. We end every podcast with the same question. We're a publishing podcast, primarily WordPress and online publishing. Is there a publisher or multiple publishers who you love to read at the moment? People who are doing great work. Could be a newsletter, could be a blog. Is there someone who, when you see a new post from them, you immediately your eyes light up and you're excited to see their new work?
Yeah, I mean, I think I have two of my friends they have Substack newsletters. One is Jessica McLeod. She's has a Substack called Thoughtful Leaders. It's thought with full in the parentheses and leaders. And it's generally about sort of leadership, but there's a very good mix of government, civic focused themes around leadership, civic leadership and government leadership. Jess has been kind of a rock star in kind of civic tech for a long time, was one of the founders of USDR, and worked, on data stuff and just been around, and she's sort of working on kind of leadership in general. And it's a great newsletter. And the other one is, Rebecca Woodbury has, with the Department of Civic Things, her focus is content design and strategy. And that's also a really great newsletter. So both of those, I think, are, they're more granular and not kind of super well known in the sort of general population, but I love what both of them are doing on that front.
Awesome. Do you have a Substack yet?
Well, I have one for GovFresh, but I just post the GovFresh work that I do there, but not one, for me personally. I guess they're both the same. GovFresh is one and the same.
Most of your work is available via lukefretwell.com, right?
Yes. Most of my sort of thought work on government and technology is at GovFresh.
So to find out more from Luke, either govfresh.com or lukefretwell.com. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Luke.
Yeah. Thank you both for having me. This was a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you.